Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Contract, a Commander podcast. I'm Mike Almond, and joining me is my co-host, Alex Lapp. Alex, what's up, man?
Not too much, Mike. Happy to be here and happy to be recording again.
Yeah, it's a chaotic time. I think we're going to be in a position where we're able to do this more regularly. I mean, my fingers are crossed, my toes are crossed, my heart, the arteries, they're crossed, which is probably bad for me. But
we gotta.
Yeah, you know, at this point, it's okay. But that just means that my blood is going to taste even more delicious for all the vampires in this set.
Oh, good point.
Yummy, yummy. Hey, we're still in Innistrad, everybody. But now, put on your nicest clothes, because we're going to a wedding. And, Alex, there's some cool stuff. There are a couple
of cool things here, Mike. I admit, I'm a little disappointed. I thought there was going to be a political theme. That was probably just wishful thinking, though, right? Because, I mean, they just ended up doing, I think, mostly a different direction. There are a good handful of cards here that we are going to talk about, cards that are political, cards that control the board, threatening, things in our wheelhouse, group hug, group slug, stacks, board wipe, symmetric effects.
Yeah.
This is our usual fare for our set review. But, you know, I was hoping we'd have so many that we could barely even cover it in one episode.
See, that's fair, but I will say that there's one or two of these.
Yeah, there's a couple of really solid.
There's really good ones for us.
Yeah.
And, yeah, you know, I was hoping that it would be more like a cascading effect where there's, 40 cards that we got to talk about. But, we're going to talk about... We're going to talk about 12, technically 13, but the 13th is for a different reason. But I'm excited to get started with these. And we're starting off spicy. Because this might be one of my favorite cards in this set. By invitation only. Alex, why don't you tell me about this card?
Yeah, Mike, this card's ridiculous. By invitation only, 3 double white. That's 5 mana for a sorcery. Choose a number between 0 and 13. That's 0 all the way through 13, not 1 through 12. Each player sacrifices that many creatures. Yeah, this is priced and timed like a board wipe, but
it gets around stuff.
Yeah, it gets around indestructible, and yeah, this is just a really interesting card here. You get to decide how many creatures each player will sacrifice. So, for example, maybe you don't have that many, so you just crank the number way up.
Yeah.
So that everybody who has more than you loses out. Or maybe you have the most creatures. Maybe you have a lot of tokens. And you can afford to sack 4 or 5 tokens, but everyone else, that's sacking their utility creatures, that's sacking their commander. And that's hitting your opponents for a lot more value than you're getting hit for. This is any board wipe that is sort of off the beaten track, right? And goes through indestructible and has this sacrifice effect. This is just very interesting. You wouldn't normally see each player sacrifices that many creatures on a white card, Mike.
Right. And not only that, you're right. It gets around indestructible. It gets around hexproof and shroud. It is something that has enough variance in it to where you
gets around protection.
It gets around protection, and you can say, in the worst case scenario, somebody has one really, really bad thing.
Yeah.
Okay, 5 mana to make them sacrifice that indestructible hexproof thing. I love cards like this where it is never a 0 in your hand. Right?
That's the interesting thing, right? I don't mean to interrupt you, but you can pick 0.
You can, and I was going to say...
That's quite an interesting... I wonder what situation where you would choose 0.
I don't know. The only thing I can think about is, like, if... I mean, maybe Storm, if you had to cast this a bunch of times or something. But, the over... Like, I guess I should have... Man, that was a bad phrase, because this is literally the first time that 0 has been an actual issue. It's never a non-factor in your hand, is I guess what I meant to say. Because it's a board wipe, and it's a targeted removal depending on what you're doing, and it's got enough.
Well, that's the thing that we need to make this very clear. This is not a normal board wipe, and it's not just because of the sacrifice effect. It's because that clause, each player sacrifices that many creatures. Each individual player, not the caster of this spell, will determine which of those creatures they sacrifice. Now, if that number is equal to or greater than the number of creatures they control, obviously there's no choice. They'll sack them all. But if it's fewer than the number of creatures they control, they get to pick and choose.
Right. Like, this goes in every token deck without a problem, right?
Yeah, I think this performs very well for token decks. There are other whiteboard wipes that do well for that. Slaughter the Strong. And then there's that. God, I love this something Revelation. There's another whiteboard wipe that's that doesn't hit tokens, which is great. But token decks can always use more board wipes because white is excellent at board wipes. Of course, it's supposed to be the board wipe color, but creature-based decks, and especially the people who run them, tend to shy away from board wipes because people don't really appreciate the instance where you would use it, of course, when you're so far behind that wiping the board is going to even you out or even put you ahead.
Right.
And for tokens, that's doubly so, right? Because tokens is all about getting more bodies on the board. Doesn't matter how good they are. Doesn't matter what's on them. Even if it's a bunch of 0-1s or a bunch of 1-1s or 2-2s. That doesn't matter. The important thing is the number of bodies you have to do whatever you want to do, to swing out, to sacrifice for aristocrats, to turn them into copies of other things. Whatever you're doing, you want more tokens.
And traditionally, you have the ability to make more faster. If people are casting just traditional creature spells, when that creature dies, unless they've got recursion effects, that's a card that they're not going to be able to use very often. Okay, it's here, now it's not. Token decks, it's all about things that generate a wide board in droves. So it's a lot easier to repopulate after that. My token decks tend to have lots of board wipes.
Was that an intentional pun, Mike?
No, it wasn't. I don't even, frankly, I'm barely hearing myself talk, so I don't even know what the pun was there.
Well, populate is a token keyword.
Oh, yeah, fair enough.
You make a copy of a token you control.
Yep, sure is. Man, it's been a while since I got to Magic. Fair enough.
This is a very unique board wipe. I think that we'll start to see it. And you're right. I think the wider you go, the better this is, which is usually not how a board wipe goes.
Right. It's very cool and I like it. Let's go ahead and move on to our next one here. A flip card, Faithbound Judge, 1 generic, white, for a 4/4 Spirit Soldier with Defender, Flying, and Vigilance. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Faithbound Judge has 2 or fewer judgment counters on it, put a judgment counter on it. As long as Faithbound Judge has 3 or more judgment counters on it, it can attack as though it didn't have Defender. I mean, okay. It's going to take a while for that to be in effect, but I don't really think
that's not why anyone's playing it. No.
It also has Disturb, 5 generic, white. And while I flip this over and get ready to read the other side, Alex, why don't you talk to us about Disturb a little bit?
Sure, Mike. Disturb's a very simple keyword. When this card with Disturb is in the graveyard, you may cast it for its Disturb cost, and it will enter the battlefield transformed.
So there you go.
That's all it is.
This is something that you want to get into your graveyard, because the reason you have it in your deck is the backside, Sinner's Judgment. This is an enchantment or a curse. Love curses. Enchant player. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a judgment counter on Sinner's Judgment. Then, if there are 3 or more judgment counters on it, enchanted player loses the game.
Wow.
If Sinner's Judgment would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile instead.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
That's quite the clock.
Yeah. That's, there's not a ton of player loses the game cards that I see a lot of, and I will put this in at least one deck.
Yeah, this is quite brutal. Now, it is very, very fragile, right? It can be removed. It doesn't have Shroud or Hexproof. And the trigger happens on the beginning of your upkeep.
Right.
So you're going to put a judgment counter on it under 3 or more. So it'll take 3 turns after you disturb it.
Yes.
Now, proliferate effects, moving counter effects, those still work, but even if you proliferate this card, you still have to wait till your upkeep to get that trigger.
Correct. It's not a, oh, I'm putting this in a deck because, holy cow, this is super strong.
Right.
It's cool. And it's one of those, like, this is cool enough to where I'm not going to build a deck around it. And
I already have a deck built around it, I think.
There you go. I was going to say, like, maybe I put this in Zedruu just because there's a bunch of curses in there. And, okay, this kind of fits, I guess. Plus, it would be fun for me to give people their own Sinner Judgment. Maybe it goes in, you know, Atraxa decks or any kind of decks that proliferate, things like that. But I just want to see it happen because it's a cool effect to basically say, hey, I'm going to put this on you. You have to remove it or kill me because at some point it's going to kill you. And I love that.
Yeah. I think I'm going to try to find room for this in Kaikar Stax Silver Bullet, but this card is already in the $14 to $20 range. Yeah,
it's pushing it because again, like I don't know. I think it's just a cool effect, and that's why it's driving in price. Because in any set other than, or in any kind of format other than Commander, that many upkeeps for you to be able to get any kind of benefit, that's going to be a problem. But it's just cool. Any card that says loses the game or wins the game usually gets our attention.
Oh yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and tell me about our next card here?
Yeah, Mike, I'm really excited about this one.
Yeah.
Sudden Salvation for 2 double white, 4 mana for an instant. Choose up to 3 target permanent cards in graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. Return them to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control. You draw a card for each opponent who controls one or more of those permanents. So immediately you can play this in a very straight way, which is you can reanimate 3 of your own permanents.
Sure.
But we can do some politicking. Oh no, the board just got wiped, possibly by me. What if we could get some of your stuff back? What kind of deals can we cut?
It's possible.
You're getting your thing back. It's not going to get used on me. And when we do that, preferably you want to spread that love, right? Because if you give one person 2 or 3 things, you only get 1 card draw.
Right.
But if you give each opponent 1 thing, you'll draw 3 cards.
See,
which I like.
And it's very cool. I'm also sitting here thinking in like the kind of like Dictate of Erebos kind of thing. If somebody else has it and okay, great. The 3 other players have to sacrifice a creature whenever a creature's come. You know, if this turns into a 4 mana draw 2 cards and return target permanent to your battlefield, I'm okay with that. Like, I like this, again, the different ways that this can work for you. And it's
very flexible.
It's very flexible, and it's 4 mana. It's not a crazy
And it's
amount.
an instant.
Yeah. Like, I'm sitting here thinking, like, Brought Back is a very good card. You know, like, I use that in a lot of decks. This passes my, does it go in a, oh man, what's the hammer? Sunforger. Does this go in a Sunforger deck? Yeah. This is cool in a Sunforger deck. I'm absolutely doing that. Like,
I think you're saying Brought Back. I think that the more direct comparison would be Faith's Reward, which is 3 and a white for an instant. Return to the battlefield all permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So that's potentially a much more powerful effect for you, but there's no politicking in that one.
Right.
And it doesn't draw you any cards.
I think, is Brought Back the one that has 2 mana for you to bring back 2 permanents? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Point is, Sudden Salvation is really cool because it has an effect that is already really useful. If the entire thing was just 2 generic white, choose up to 3 target permanent cards in graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. Return them to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control. If there was no draw card clause, this would still be a card I would like. The fact that there is an upside if you pick someone else to get the benefit, I'm a big fan of that. You know, I'm totally for that.
This, I'm definitely because this is not a dead card. If you can't strike a deal, you're still going to get 3 of your own things.
Right.
But if you can get a deal, all right, basically those cards that you reanimated are still mostly yours.
Right.
Because they can't hurt you, but they can hurt everyone else.
Yeah.
You know, with the deals, not with the power of the rules.
Right.
And then on top of that, you're drawing. So I think it's at a very middling power level for politics, but not every political card has to be just super bonkers.
Yeah,
OP.
I consider this more of this is just a good card that has political play rather than a political card that can be good.
I think if you don't intend to play it politically, you probably don't run it.
Okay. I think I'm more keen on it, but I get it. Because you would play
Proppacker Face Reward at that point.
That's fair. Well, let's move on to a very political card.
Yes.
In fact, one of possibly the more political cards flavor-wise that I can remember. Wedding Ring. 2 generic white for an artifact. When Wedding Ring enters the battlefield, if it was cast, target opponent creates a token that's a copy of it. Whenever an opponent who controls an artifact named Wedding Ring draws a card during their turn, you draw a card. Whenever an opponent who controls an artifact named Wedding Ring gains life during their turn, you gain that much life. It's literally what's mine is yours. Yes. But all benefit. There is no in sickness and it's no in sickness. It's only in health. And I dig this. My one concern is if you play this, you have to be smart about it. Because this is a really good way for you to turn a game into Two-Headed Giant without meaning to, depending on who you're talking to and how you're doing things. It's also a really good way for you to say, oh, this person's ahead, and they're drawing lots of cards. I'm going to draw cards when they draw cards. Well, as long as that person is truly the arch enemy, and you're, tying yourself to them, you better let the table know that there's some way that you're trying to even things out. Because otherwise all this is just now I will benefit as well.
Well, that's the thing is this is, for the most part, pretty easy to skirt and work around if you were so inclined. So really, other than for sort of chilling effects like sorcery speed, life gain, and card draw, which do happen, I think it's best used as its flavor is specifically as a political card, right? Because it would be so easy for you to try to lock down the arch enemy,
right? And
they're like, okay, well, I'll just cast this instant speed card draw spell on someone else's turn, and it's not going to give you any cards, right? So it's not difficult to work around it, but if you're rather than using it as a ball and chain, using it as, a peace offering.
Right.
I think that'll be much more effective.
Oh, for sure. And that's where I get into the way that this can work is if you're tying to somebody who's already way far ahead and you're trying to catch up, or it has to be a peace offering, like you said, which means there's likely going to be 2 other players at the table that also see you as a threat now if they didn't before.
There's a really simple solution to that. Just make token copies of Wedding Ring, and pass them out like Fractured Identity.
Yes, that's kind of where I was
now
wanting
the whole
to
table's married.
It's just everybody we're in a collective now.
Thruple.
I was gonna say the Wedding Ring. I do like it. I like it more in group hug decks than I do just straight up political decks.
I'm surprised that it's a mythic.
I am too. I'm surprised that I'm trying to...
Now, I know Mythic's not supposed to mean powerful, especially in white, but...
Right, but at the same time, I don't understand the premise of making this Mythic in... I don't know. If you're gonna lean into, I think if it was Mythic, I'd almost want it to cost less. You know, if you wanted this card to be truly powerful, and hey, this is a big deal. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a 4 mana in mono white that says you get to do extra stuff if your opponent does extra stuff on their turn.
Yeah, it's a 4 mana artifacts in white that enters the battlefield and nothing happens. So we have to be very considerate of the value that we expect to get out of it, because spending 4 mana in white is not nothing. It's not like this is a green artifact where you're just like, oh yeah, I'll toss this out. It's not a big deal. I
almost think that you have to have the ability to copy this or be in a deck where you are playing with people that are drawing lots of cards for this to have really a lot of value at all. And white isn't usually the color that's doing those things.
Yeah, white doesn't tend to copy artifacts. Now, equipment it can sort of finagle, but this is of course not an equipment. Mm-hmm.
And you can create copies of tokens with a couple of things, but you're not the one who's getting the token.
Right.
But
this is it's a very interesting idea. I love the political angle, but just like a couple of the other cards we talked about, the power level is very medium low.
Yeah. It's a cool concept, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I will still try and put this in a deck just because, neat.
Yeah, this is a really cool card. I don't know. I almost wish that they're clearly trying to push this political angle for white, because white has, of the cards we'll talk about today, it seems like white has the most. It is 4 cards that we've identified as having some sort of political play style.
Yep.
But overall, the power level is quite a bit lower than I think would be used to in a commander set.
Sure. Let's go ahead and move on to something extremely powerful, in my opinion. Moving on to blue.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with Hullbreaker Horror, because gross. 5 generic blue for a 7/8 Kraken Horror with flash. Okay. This spell can't be countered. Seems pretty good. Whenever you cast a spell, choose up to 1. Return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand, or return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. This is nutty to me.
Yeah, that's a lot of value.
That's nutty. This is in blue, cast this on your opponent's end step. Can't be countered. Whenever you cast a spell, bounce spell back to its owner's hand, or bounce permanent to its owner's hand.
Yeah, once this is out, as long as you have any instant speed interaction in hand and mana to cast it, every instant in your hand is now a counterspell.
A counterspell that bounces it back to hand rather than graveyard, but still a counterspell.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's... Like, this is a Talrand ridiculous card immediately.
But even more so, this is a fierce rattlesnake, right?
Yeah.
You see this, and like, what's the point of even trying to remove it? Any spell in their hand is going to stop you from doing it.
I think you almost, whenever you have this on the battlefield, I think you should be required to display how many cards you have in hand with like a sign above your head. Because that's going to be the thing that always gets checked. How much mana do you have untapped? And how many cards do you have in hand?
Yeah, you kind of want to try to catch the player without mana in hand, but I mean, goodness gracious, there are spells in the game that will bounce back to hand once resolved, or you can buy them back, and they don't necessarily have to be in mono blue. And my goodness,
I actually do have a problem with this card at the same time.
Okay.
Because, like, it's powerful, and that's fine. I don't have a problem that it's powerful. Did it need both of the clauses that you could choose from, as far as return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand, or return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand?
That kind of just... It's a... What would you say? It's a fortress with all 4 walls. It's got flash.
Yep. Can't be countered itself.
Can't be countered.
It's 8 toughness.
Yeah.
Like, it's...
So most damage won't remove it. And... all of your spells in hand are now either delay or
bounce,
or the 2-mana version of Cyclonic Rift.
Yeah, and here's the thing: if you're playing a deck that cares about ETBs, great, you can bounce your own stuff all the time. If you play a counterspell, congratulations, that is now a counterspell as well as bounce. Like, the value you get off this thing is kind of insane.
Yeah, counterspell can now counter 2 spells.
It
can
could
counterspell and then bounce another spell.
Yeah, it's just it's extremely powerful, and
this is
if this if this was a 4/4, it would still be very, very good. It's a 7/8.
Yeah, this is very, very strong. Now, it is 7 mana.
Yes.
And it doesn't have evasion, but it doesn't need evasion because now you can threaten every card in your hand. Says,
right.
No, this creature's not being removed.
It's not on board evasion, but it's in hand evasion.
Yeah, it's rattlesnake evasion.
Yeah.
This card is just, it's very commander, I'll give it that.
Yeah, it does lean into the powerful blue. But, I mean, again, it's a cool card. It's a powerful card. There's a lot of decks that I could put it in, and
you
totally
really just control the board with this.
Yeah,
like, you immediately become the archenemy.
Yeah, that's a. I almost feel like this is a card that basically buys you a turn because you are going to have everybody throw their targeted removal at you to get rid of this until you run out of resources to be able to use it. But you know what? Same time, if you do it on somebody else's end step, you basically get to say, all right, I'm going to win the game now if you have it in hand. Because you have a whole bunch of ways to stop everybody. It's got a lot of text to it. Let's talk about a card that costs a lot less and has a lot of text to it, but in a different way. Go ahead and talk to me about Wash Away.
Sure. Wash Away is a blue for an instant, 1 mana, with Cleave for 1 double blue. Counter target spell that wasn't cast from its owner's hand. Now, Cleave says that the clause that wasn't cast from its owner's hand is ignored if you pay the Cleave cost, which is 3 mana, 1 double blue instead of 1 mana. So, for 3 mana, it's a cancel, which is not good. But, for 1 mana, it's counter target commander.
Basically.
Right? Because commanders tend not to be cast from their owner's hand.
Right.
And you can pretty reliably ensure that most players want to cast their commander. Being able to counterspell that for 1 mana is very nice, but it's not a dead card when you need to cast it for something else. Obviously, cancel is a little bit more than you want to be paying 3 mana for a counterspell, and it doesn't have upside, but this is a modal spell, and you can get the phenomenal value of a 1 mana counterspell. Everybody loves Swan Song, and just getting a counterspell for 1 mana is fantastic. And this is an uncommon, so it's going to be really, really cheap. And I think that budget control decks are really going to like this one.
See, budget control decks, I agree with you. I could also see this being in CEDH. Because it's a 1 mana counter target commander with the option of 3 mana regular counterspell in the worst case scenario.
I don't know enough about CEDH to make comment on that, but maybe they like it.
When you're talking, the only things I know about CEDH is it's about raw efficiency, speed, power, do the thing as fast as possible. A 1 mana counterspell to the commander feels like something that's going to be able to be used pretty consistently. In just about
to be clear, commander's the most obvious thing you would counter with it, but you can counter something that they cast out of their graveyard or library.
Out of exile.
Out of exile, yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of, especially recently, there's been a lot of stuff that is determined on, we're going to exile cards from your opponent's deck and you can cast them from exile.
I think that if this didn't have the modal cleave effect, you would never play it.
Right. Because at that point,
because it does.
Yeah.
Now it's never dead. Now, worst case scenario, it's just an inefficient counterspell. But best case scenario, it's a extremely efficient counterspell.
Yeah. No, it is a card. I probably won't use it a lot because I don't play a lot of counter spells, but I won't be surprised when I see it going forward, especially as an uncommon.
Yeah, got your commander countered for 1 mana.
Yep, that'll do it. Let's go ahead and move on to black here, and kind of a board wipe, possibly a board wipe.
It's a board wipe.
Yeah, well, as long as you're playing fair. Olivia's Wrath, 4 generic and a black for a sorcery. Each non-vampire creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is the number of vampires you control. Tribal board wipes. Here we go.
Yep.
Woo. That's not bad.
Black
though.
has another very, very effective tribal board wipe. Crux of Fate. Yeah. So Crux of Fate is that classic black tribal board wipe where it's just completely devastating. It doesn't hit any of your stuff, and it hits all of your opponent's stuff. And normally, to get an asymmetric board wipe like that, you would be paying a lot more than 5 mana, right? You'd be playing Ingaruk's Wake, which is 9 mana, I think. And then you have, in blue, of course, you have Cyclonic Rift, which is the best spell in the game.
Right.
For 7 mana. I think pretty much any vampire deck ever is gonna take this. Because it doesn't say non-token vampires.
Right.
So Edric, the original Edric, not the new Edric. I think pretty much every vampire deck, because I think every deck should have board wipes, and I think this is probably the best board wipe in your vampire deck.
Yeah, because there are very few vampire decks that don't thrive off of making lots of vampires.
Of course.
There's a couple that care about making bigger vampires with, now. But it's more based off of vampire tribal is lots of vampires.
Right.
How many vampires do you have to have on the battlefield for this not to be a good spell? 2?
Yeah, I mean...
It's good. Because it gets around all the gross stuff that normally, is the dampener for a board wipe. It's
a -X.
It's so good.
Which, of course, is an excellent board wipe. It's nearly as good as Sacrifice because it's also going to go through Indestructible. It's also going to go through Protection from Black. And it also goes through Hexproof and Shroud. Yeah. So all of the things that the whiteboard wipe we talked about earlier, Sacrifice goes through, -X will also go through.
Yeah, it's...
so this effect is very powerful.
It's very good. If you're playing a vampire deck, it automatically goes in.
Pretty much you run it without question. We have another board wipe too.
Yeah, we do. This one is it's not just black, but it's weird.
It's Orzhov.
Yeah, exactly. Path of Peril. 1 generic, black for a sorcery. Destroy all creatures with mana value 2 or less. Or you have Cleave, which is 4 generic, white-black. You may cast this spell for its cleave cost. If you do, remove the words from the square brackets, which is the with mana value 2 or less, which means it becomes 4 generic, white-black, destroy all creatures. Gross.
Yeah. This is phenomenal. I think that Cleave, in certain cases, like the cases that we've talked about here, is, we can joke about how every keyword is actually kicker.
Yeah, basically.
And that's basically what this is. But it's this is not something that can be so easily written off. Now, 6 mana, of course, that's a lot of mana for destroy all creatures. But let's say that you're running an Orzhov deck and you tend to go big. Maybe you have a lot of high mana value creatures. There are decks that will just have enough medium to high CMC creatures that they wouldn't even be down a card casting Path of Peril without a sleep cost, right?
Right.
There are definitely cases where that would apply. And depending on your meta, maybe in CEDH, now I don't know anything about CEDH, but I know that they tend to run very efficient spells, and in high power EDH as well, they tend to run efficient spells. So what this would hit at 3 mana, because keep in mind, this can be a 3 mana board wipe with downside, hitting all of these mana value 2 or less creatures, that's going to hit all the mana dorks. It's going to hit all the creatures at the beginning of the game. I know for a fact that decks that like to commit a lot to the board, aggressive decks that have green or white in them, that just want to commit a lot of stuff to the board very early to develop that board presence for whatever reason they want to be doing that, to sacrifice it, to defend, to attack. For any reason, any deck that's applying a lot of creatures to the board early, for the most part, those creatures are going to be low mana value. And it's worth saying that all tokens that are not copies of another permanent will have mana value 0.
Right.
So this will automatically destroy all non-copy tokens.
Not to mention that if you're playing Orzhov, there's a decent chance that you're playing a deck where you care about your own stuff dying. And if you're playing small stuff that you want to die, great. Destroy all creatures, mana value 2 or less for 3 mana.
Cool. And then reanimate your whole graveyard.
And then reanimate stuff.
Yeah.
I think we've discussed it a little bit before. Whenever something has a kicker cost or if something has multiple options, I'm willing to pay an extra mana or sometimes 2 to have a card that has 2 different effects. You know what I mean? I'm good with that.
Because when you're using a modal spell, you're paying for the convenience, and the way that you're paying for that is either with an increased mana cost or a powered down effect.
Right. Especially
Especially cards that have multiple difference, like the command spells. Silumgar's command that have like 3 or 4 options, charms. The individual effects on those tend to be very weak, but the fact that you have 3 or 4 choices makes it very good. And for this, you only have 2 choices, and they're both pretty good, but the downside is that one of the choices costs a lot more than it would normally cost if you were just casting Destroy All Creatures.
Right. And I'm okay with that. I would rather play a card like this that has choices on it for a little bit more mana than just play a 4 or 5 mana typical board wipe. But that's me.
I don't think it doesn't just go into any Orzhov deck.
Oh,
you
no.
have to, you're looking at your creature curve.
Right.
And you're making a conscious decision. There are times when I would either want to destroy all of my stuff that's mana value 2 or less, or I'm never going to have anything that's mana value 2 or less that I don't mind losing. It's not just something you throw in there, but I think in many Orzhov decks, this can find a place because a 3 mana board wipe early in the game, knocking out all those mana dorks and low value utility creatures, that's devastating because they kept a hand with those cards in it. Now they only have like 3 or 4 cards left in their hand and they have no board presence. So they might just have been knocked back like 3 or 4 turns.
I'm just even sitting here thinking about like if you're playing against like an Elves deck or something where there's a bunch of mana dorks and their whole point is to try and ramp out stuff with all these mana dorks. Well, great. You're right. They emptied out half their hand to be able to prepare to cast their big stuff. Okay, well, I'm going to use this 3 mana spell. I'm going to wipe the board. What's your new plan?
Even though it seems very restrictive, mana value 2 or less, a board wipe at 3 mana is nothing to sneeze at.
No, not at all.
And then it also is a 6 mana mode.
Yeah, this is a cool card. We're going to talk about a couple more right after we take a quick break. All right, we have gone through white, we've gone through blue, we've gone through black, and also for a second, black and white. Let's move on to red, and I don't know if it's my favorite card that we're going to talk about today, but it's either this or the next one. Let's talk about Curse of Hospitality, Alex.
Curse of Hospitality is the only curse in this set on the front face of the card. We did talk about a white card that transforms into a curse card, but this is the only one that I'm aware of that has curse on the front. Curse of Hospitality is 2 and a red. That's 3 mana for an enchantment or a curse. Enchant player. Creatures attacking enchanted player have trample. Now, even if it stopped there, I think that would be passable. But it keeps going. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to an enchanted player, which will be very easy because it has trample, that player exiles the top card of their library until end of turn. That creature's controller may play that card, and they may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell.
This is nuts!
That's the attacking player will Itali their card off the top.
This is nuts!
Yeah. This is... Normally, with curses, you kind of have to play the table right. You're like, okay, guys, if you attack this player, you'll get a treasure token, or you can get a little something, a creature token. Curse of Hospitality, I don't think you don't have to even say anything twice. I think people will just do it to get that free value.
Right. There are a few cards I can think of that if somebody's the archenemy, you have a like, okay, I'm going to play this on you, and maybe this alone is going to get us back into the game.
Yeah, this is
really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
because now everybody's bored that they may not even have been ready to do any attacks with. Now they're like, wow, if I can even chip in, I can just start getting card draw for free, and maybe I can cast a spell off of it.
And it's not just card draw, it's stealing cards. Ooh.
Yeah.
That's card draw and advantage. Ooh.
If they, oh my God, if they tutor something to the top of their library with a tutor,
like,
no.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Would you play a 3-mana spell that says just the top part, enchant player, creatures attacking enchanted player have trample? That's the curse.
Yeah, I might. That's what I was saying.
That's pretty close, right?
Right. That's pretty close to what at 3 mana I'd say that's medium low power, but it's definitely playable.
It fits in some archetypes, right? Then the other part of it is
with
nuts.
This, they steal the top card of their library and they spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. Especially when you're putting this on the archenemy. Well, if they're the archenemy, they probably have some pretty decent cards in their deck.
Is this one of those things where it costs 3 mana because it's something that can benefit your opponent, so they have to undercost it?
Absolutely. Okay. That's absolutely what's
happening. That's the only way I can understand it.
Yeah. Because this was only you.
Oh, yeah. And even then, if it was that, it would still be a cool card, as far as I'm concerned.
No, this is a good card. Lovely design for a curse.
This needs to go into any kind of forced combat deck. I love this. Any kind of like the weird thing is the first thing that I thought about here. I thought Omnath, because Omnath loves making 5/5 elementals, and it's like, all right, cool. There's a couple. There's plenty of ways to give yourself trample and everything like that, but. Can I Omnath?
He means Omnath Locus of Rage.
Yes. Can I Omnath and make myself have trample against this player and exile a bunch of cards and cast those cards? Woo! And I got really excited about stuff. And then digging, it's like, wait, this fits forced combat. It fits make big creatures. It fits obviously curse decks. Like, this fits a lot of things that I like because of that second clause. And even if that clause wasn't there, I'd still like it for the first one.
An effect like this, at this mana cost, you're almost searching the rules text for something like a limiter.
Right.
Like whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to enchanted player. And then you get one card. But no, every single creature that goes through gets a card. And this is relevant for forced combat decks if those creatures have double strike, or if you attack on multiple combats in the same turn, it'll trigger every single time they hit.
You might be able to mill somebody out with this, depending on what you're dealing with.
Maybe.
If it's a collective, the entire table, here we go. If somebody is that far ahead to where it's worth it to cast this, there's a decent chance that you're going to at least make them worry about their library size. But maybe that's just because I'm thinking tokens based off everything we've talked about so far on this episode.
I think this, there's a lot of decks this would slide right into Najeela.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It's a cool deck.
I like this.
It's a cool card for a lot of decks. Let's talk about the only thing that's giving it competition for the direction of my affection. Imposing Grandeur. 4 generic and a red for a sorcery. Each player may discard their hand and draw cards equal to the greatest mana value of a commander they own on the battlefield or in the command zone.
Yeah, wow.
I like this a lot. The game is getting so much more efficient because they keep making efficiency cards. And I love battlecruiser stuff. And this is rewarding me for battlecruiser stuff.
Yeah, there was a cycle in the previous set where there were these cards that had flashback, and you could cast them again and reduce their mana cost based on the mana value of a commander you controlled or owned in the command zone.
Right.
And I think this is a bit of a callback to that, right? Where this is a symmetric effect that players may optionally participate in, but you're running this in your red deck with the fattest commander in the world, a 7, 8, 9, 10 mana commander.
Let's talk about Piru and how this would immediately go into that deck tech that we did.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, this is great because it's discard your hand and everybody draws their commander worth.
And I think that we talk about wheels at a decent clip, and wheels are in this place right now where Wizards clearly has their eye on them. The RC definitely has their eye on them because wheels tend to have these extremely high power synergies with card draw and card discard and limiting the number of cards you can draw. And that's all well and good for some people, but the fact that this card is an optional effect immediately takes the edge off of it right away. Right? Because now this is a fun, does anybody want to wheel? And anyone who doesn't want to doesn't have to. But you know that you are running it in your very high mana value commander deck where you're definitely getting a ton of draw out of it.
Because it is a May, I almost wish it cost a little bit less, but I still understand it being 5. Like, I get it.
It costs 5 because there are 9 CMC red commanders that will draw 9 for 5 mana. Which is great.
It's great. And again, so here's my question, Alex. What does your commander's mana value have to be for you to want to run this card?
That's a good question. I think that the answer to that depends on the color ID of your commander. Sure. I think that if your commander has blue or black in it, or maybe even green, that you want to have a much higher value on it. But I think that if you're a red commander, that you might be okay with drawing 5 or 6. Because, yes, red can do a little bit of draw, but this is actual draw. This isn't impulse draw. This isn't exile this card and you may play it until end of turn. This is actually drawing cards in red.
I think in Boros, I think I'm good with 4. I have to be able to draw 4. But
yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to be playing this and drawing less than 4.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. If this is it's built off of, it's literally imposing grandeur. It's built off of being the big beefy commander, right? But if I had a 4 mana commander and the colors that don't draw a lot of cards, I still probably look at this and maybe run it. And I think that says everything about this card that it needs to.
Yeah, when I take a look, people were talking about Dargo the Shipwrecker, which is a very silly, uncommon commander from Commander Legends. And he's a 6 and a red. It's a 7 mana legendary creature giant pirate.
He's the one where you sacrifice.
As an additional cost to cast a spell, you may sacrifice any number of artifacts and/or creatures, and it costs 2 mana less for each permanent you sacrifice this way.
And have for the turn, which is the nutsy thing, because then you play it with treasures, and holy cow, he's extremely cheap. Yeah,
exactly. So he's cheap to cast, but that high mana value will be rewarded with imposing grandeur.
Yeah, no, this is that absolutely. This is a cool card. And the more we talk about it, the more that I have set myself in concrete on that opinion. So I like it. Why don't you tell me about our next card here?
Sure. This is Loreen the Diversion for 2 and a red, 3 mana. It's a commander, legendary creature, human rogue. She's a 3/3. And she has a partner with Camber the Plunderer, who we will talk about in just a minute here. That means that she can only partner with that commander. Yep. If you want to use this commander as a partner, it's only with Camber, not with any other card. She has first strike, and she has an activated ability, pay 2 generic, sacrifice an artifact or creature to goad target creature.
That's cool.
Now, that ability is not very high power, but we talked about this in our last episode. Goading a creature is certainly not nothing.
No.
It's the ability to make a very specific move that can have larger consequences, because now that dangerous creature is attacking someone else who's not you. Now that utility creature that they definitely did not want to be attacking, now it's attacking someone who's not you. Someone's going to kill it. This is not necessarily spot removal, but it's definitely going to make somebody clench when you goad the creature that they really don't want to lose or that they really wanted to attack you with.
This is one of the scarier rattlesnakes that exists as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly. You don't have to tap. You can keep activating
It's repeatable and it's instant speed. And worst case scenario, it doesn't say sacrifice another creature. So Lorraine can be the cost of the sacrifice. Like in the worst case scenario, it's still capable of working on its own. And I'm leaning more into the forced combat type of archetype. And, I keep like, I want to make a Thantis deck. Well, now, Rakdos has really leaned into having a lot of cool forced combat stuff. So maybe I just go into Rakdos. And Lorraine is a cool card for doing that. I like it. I like the ability, even just the overall value on the card. Human Rogue, those are tribes that I care about. 3 mana for a 3/3 with First Strike. That gets me another card out of my deck if this is in the 99. I'm good with that. A sack outlet for artifacts and creatures. Pretty good with that. With upside. And it's instant speed. This is cool. I don't think I get attacked very often if this is out here.
No, this is definitely a low to medium power commander, and it's going to lie low. It's not going to make a lot of people worried about what you're doing.
Right.
And you're going to be able to make some interesting plays that impact the board without you yourself being threatening pretty much at all.
I'm looking at this card, and this absolutely could be an include in my Jessica and Arden deck, just because, okay, I'm going to soup a whole bunch of... I'm going to soup up one big creature, and then I'm going to make sure it's swinging at somebody. That feels cool. That's a cool effect, and that's even in a deck where that's not what that tries to do.
On an opponent's creature, and then... At that point, you don't even need to cut a deal. It's attacking, and it's going towards someone else.
It's just, I dig it. I like that a lot. Let's go ahead and move on to our last card that we were going to talk about before, but not the last card we're going to talk about here. Talk to me about Howling Moon.
Sure. Howling Moon is 2 and a green, 3 mana for an enchantment. This will be a wolf or werewolf tribal enchantment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target wolf or werewolf you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Okay. And it also has, whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token.
That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for.
That's what we're here to talk about. Because obviously that's decent value in your werewolf deck, but this effect... Now, we've seen cards in the game that care about when an opponent casts their second spell each turn.
Yeah. Draw a card.
This is... Yeah, draw a card. This is one of those because the value is very small. I don't think that you're going to get too many people not casting their second spell.
Right, for you to get an extra 2/2.
Right. But this is going to rapidly build your board up. It's going to quickly become something... where now you have all these 2/2s, and they are in your tribe, presumably, if you're running a wolf or werewolf deck. Although, to be honest, just that second clause might be enough to run it in any green token.
Yeah, I was going to say that the decks that I was thinking about where I was in on this are all of the ones where I care about having creatures to sacrifice or tokens. Yeah. So this was going in my Marin deck. This is going in my Kineos and Tiro deck. This is going into... I have another green token deck.
This is very nice. I think that the reason why we've included it is not just because it gives that value, but because at a certain point, when you've turned this either into an engine or your board presence is significant, or for any other reason, at some point, your opponents might start thinking like, wow, do I really want to give them another token that they're going to sacrifice and then do something else scary with? And at some point that might give them pause. Maybe they don't want to cast their second spell. And that's a very significant effect to start happening.
I mean,
for 3 mana.
Yeah, if at the worst case, this is a 3 mana, get 2 2/2s, and then an opponent realizes that they need to remove this. So it's a...
Well, now they just removed, like, a medium value enchantment for 3
and
mana.
a card from their hand to do so. I feel like this is one of those, like, the floor isn't very high, and this, like, it's a low floor, low ceiling, but you're always in the middle. You're not going to feel bad that you wasted this unless people are casting 10 mana spells on their turn and that's it. Okay, great. Get some 2/2s. Get some ETBs off of creatures entering the battlefield. Get some tokens that you can sacrifice. If you have the ability to turn those tokens into something else, that's very cool. I like this a lot.
You know what I really like with this is Greater Good.
Yeah.
So Greater Good is 2 and double green for an enchantment. Sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power, then discard 3 cards. So with this enchantment, you'll make a 2/2. At the beginning of combat, it'll become a 4/4, and then at instant speed, you can sacrifice it to Greater Good to draw 4, discard 3.
Oh, I wasn't even thinking about
which now you're positive on cards, which is great.
I was thinking about it in like the token doubler kind of decks, but
you can run token doublers, but
no, that's a really cool synergy. And the other one, and the reason why I thought we were including this, to be honest with you, we're group hug. We want people to have options. We want people to cast stuff out of their hands. We want them to do things, which means they're going to be casting more than one spell a turn. Great. This is my 3 mana make 3 2/2s.
That is the other angle, right? Because in our group hug decks, we give people card draw, we give people mana, and we try to make a situation where we want people to be playing out their decks.
Right.
And when people are playing their decks, they're casting more than one spell each turn, and we're getting value off of that. That's great. But this card has... It has some interesting angles to it. It's not just a generic token generator.
Yeah. No, this has got options. It can do stuff, and it's low enough on the threat assessment board to where if somebody is removing it, it's because they just have a plethora of options. It's not because it's the scariest thing on the board, and that's okay with me. I'm okay with that.
This reminds me of Awakening Zone a little bit, right?
It's
that very steady value. Awakening Zone's 2 and a green for an enchantment. You'll make a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn on your upkeep. It's not making you a lot of tokens necessarily, but it is just slowly churning out that value. And before you know it, this 3 mana card has gotten you 9 mana worth of value, and people are starting to think about whether they want to stop casting spells or maybe even remove it.
I dig it. I like cards like this. The more niche cards that are kind of like, okay, well, that's not bad. It's like, or is this card super awesome without being scary? And I think that's where I like to live in my deck decks if I can help it. We have one more card to talk about, but it's a little weird. And you're going to be doing a decent amount of explaining. So how about I read out the card and you tell us why we need to care about it? Does that sound fair?
Sure.
Okay. Yep. So Alex brought this to my attention. This is Camber the Plunderer. 3 generic and a black for a 3/4 vampire rogue. Partner with Lorene, the Diversion. Hey, we just got done talking about her. And it also has lifelink. Whenever a creature dies, you gain 1 life and create a blood token. It's an artifact with generic 1. Tap it, discard a card, sacrifice an artifact, draw a card. Okay, fair enough. Why are we talking about this, Alex?
Well, Mike, we're talking about it because you've just made a mistake that I think any player would make, right? And that's reading the card that just got announced and just came out and thinking, yeah, that's what the card does. I just read it. Reading the card explains the card. No. Because there was a misprint in the previews, and I've been informed that this misprint will not be present on the physical commander card in the deck when it is actually printed.
Okay.
However, all the same, this is a pretty significant difference in the preview card and the actual card, and I think that, especially since this is at the helm or as one of the alternate commanders, right, of one of the Crimson Vow commander decks, that this, I guess we can call it a Day Zero errata. I think it's really just a mistake that they made on the
it's a typo,
card.
or however you want to call it.
But this is significant. Let's talk about what's different.
Yeah, please.
On the actual preview card, it says, whenever a creature dies, you gain 1 life and make a blood token. The actual Oracle text says, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies.
Oh, that's a huge difference.
Yeah. That is a huge difference. And I think that it would be, I think the scenario has probably already happened that somebody saw this card and they read that text and they thought, wow, that's super good. I can combo with this, this, and this. I'm going to pre-order the deck right now. And guess what? That's not what the card does. And when you get that deck arrived to your house, it's going to say something different. It's going to say whenever a creature an opponent controls dies. So I just want our listeners and spread the word, please.
Yeah.
Just be aware of this. The printed card is wrong. It is not whenever any creature dies. It's only when an opponent's creature
Spread
dies.
the word. Camber is okay. Not great.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Like, in my head, it's like, okay, well, I mean, that makes a difference. And then I thought about all of the black archetypes that care about sacrificing your own stuff.
Yep.
And
it completely changes the way the deck
really does. Because now it's
goes from aristocrats or anything like that, and now it's something else.
Right. This is now.
It's not bad.
It's not bad.
But the power level is much lower, and the number of combo avenues is abysmal in comparison, frankly.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that this card is worthless. And I just want people to know what they're buying when you buy, if you buy the Crimson Vow commander decks. Make sure that you take a look and confirm that
you got the right
this
one.
is the card that you want. Because if you saw this preview card and you're like, wow, I want to build that, that's not what it does.
Make sure you're getting the right thing. And if you get the wrong thing, you can probably trade it in for the right thing at a higher value, because mistakes are usually liked.
Now, Mike, if they wanted to buy this card, even knowing that it says creature and opponent controls dies, what would they do to go buy that card?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Alex. If you want to buy any of the cards we talked about, deck boxes, sleeves, full-on commander precons from this set, etc., you can support us by going to bit.ly/EDH_social. We'll be able to put a link in our show notes for you to be able to use that, as well as a link for our Discord. You can come into our Discord community, talk to us with some of the cards that you're excited about. If you have some cards that you play that maybe you don't think get nearly enough play, great, let us know. At some point, I think, Alex, our next episode is just going to be a big, ooh, can I see that, catching up on a bunch of things.
For sure. Because we've gotten a lot of great recommendations from our Discord members. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. Our Discord is very cozy right now. There's only a handful of people in there.
But active.
Our biggest fans, right? Yeah, but active. And if you are listening to this podcast right now and think like, well, I've been here since day one, come on in, because you're still on the ground floor. And I agree with you, Mike. I think we should do an episode pretty soon here where we'll just
go through the
showcase
backlog.
all of the different cards that our listeners in Discord have linked to us that are extremely uncommon, cards that are in less than 1% of decks that can run them.
And you know what? They say often that the best time to do it was yesterday and the next best time to do it is right now. You should come hang out with us now.
Absolutely.
If you wanted to follow us on Twitter, you could do that at EDH_social, or email us at the social contract EDH@gmail.com. I will fix that in post. Boop, 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 boo. 107 flat. Cool. Pick up. Alex, if they had any questions about anything, and maybe they're shy, maybe they don't want to head into the Discord yet because they want to dip their toe in the waters and talk to you first about some questions that they might have for a judge, how would they contact you?
Absolutely. You can get me on Twitter at Lappermedic, LAPPERMEDIC. You can either tweet at me with your rules questions, you can DM me if that's better for you, or you can email me in private, alex@edhrack.com, and we can hash it out.
Perfect. everybody, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Alex, I know I did. And frankly, I'm so excited that we're going to have a break before the next set. Like, it's going to be like...
It's been happening more and more lately, right?
Yeah.
They just keep pumping out the sets.
Which is
like,
cool.
It's great.
But
it's tiring.
It's a lot to keep track of. So I hope that you're enjoying us trying to help you keep track of everything, and maybe not just talking about the most powerful cards, but the ones that you can have more interaction with your table at.
The political cards, the social cards.
Yeah, exactly. Enjoy the social contract that you have of enjoying a game of Magic with your friends, or, opponents, depending on how you feel about your play group. Regardless, we'll talk to you soon.